people who work on this topic for the government, what they know falls into two categories. One, classified, and they just cannot talk about it with anyone, whether they're in private or in any scenario, right? The other information that they can lawfully talk about, historically, they've just been discouraged from talking about, right? Like, yes, you legally can talk about this, but if you do, your reputation will be ruined, your credibility will ruined. In some cases, people have been, given threats, threatening their lives. So there's been all these deterrences to people speaking about even what they lawfully could. And as I got to know these few intelligence officials early on, I learned that those were the circumstances, right? And the reason no one guy ever went out on, CNN or Fox or in a standalone article and shared his truth was because none of these guys wanted to be out on a limb on their own. They didn't want to be subject to ridicule by themselves. They didn't want to be the one guy saying something extraordinary and then have the people who covered this up go and attack them, right? It just wasn't worth it. And so as I learned that was the lay of the land, I presented an opportunity, a solution, which was, well, what if I make an independent film that I control? I don't set it up at a studio that's going to sensationalize it and make it all, entertainment. And I interview dozens of people who have direct knowledge of this. And we keep it all quiet. And you're arm in arm. There's strength in numbers. You're arm in arm with dozens of other credible people. There's no gotchas. Like I would socialize who's doing it, what's being discussed, what's being revealed. Everyone would know the full picture that's involved, and no one outside of the circle would know anything about it until it's done. And that opportunity I put forth started to catch wind, and then I started to get passed around within government, military, intelligence circles, and I started to essentially, for lack of better words, get passed up the ladder.
All right, I'm Dave Rubin, and joining me today is the director and producer of the new film, The Age of Disclosure, Dan Farah. Welcome to the Rubin Report.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Dan, we're doing this Christmas week, and I promised people that we're going to mostly get away from politics, so I thought, okay, we could talk aliens, we could talk intelligent life off this planet, all of those things. The movie is somewhat political, though, so we'll see how we manage that. But I thought before we do that, for people that are not familiar with your work, when I was doing a little digging on you, you were one of the producers of Ready Player One, a movie and a book that I read many, many years ago, but a movie that I reference all the time on this show as it relates to the way we bounce between the online and real world and which one is real and which one is more influential and what those touch points are. So before we do Age of Disclosure, can you give me a little bit of a bio, and then I want to talk a bit about Ready Player One, and then we'll dive in.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So for the last 20 years, primarily I've been producing in mainstream Hollywood. And certainly the thing I'm the most proud of is Ready Player One. I built that from the ground up as a producer. Like you said, it's based on Ernie Cline's amazing novel, Ready Player One. And we developed it at Warner Brothers, and we turned it into this big blockbuster that Steven Spielberg directed, which is, a career highlight and dream come true for me as a child of the 80s and early 90s. I grew up on a steady diet of Spielberg movies. And so getting a chance to work with him was, obviously a dream come true. And the movie's fantastic. It was actually Spielberg's early movies, Close Encounters and E.T., that really piqued my curiosity in the UFO topic. And these big questions like, are we alone in the universe? Does the U.S. government know more about those matters than we do? And then years later, when we were on the set of Ready Player One, and I was watching him direct in person, standing a few feet away from him, it was so, awe-inspiring and motivating. It made me start thinking about what I could direct, and that segue from producing to directing and what that could be. And ultimately, I decided to make The Age of Disclosure as my first film as a director. It was a film I always wished existed. I always wished there was a documentary that only interviewed people who are extremely credible, who have worked for the U.S. government and have direct knowledge as a result of that work of the UAP topic, the UFO topic, right? And so, after seeing him direct on the set of Ready Player One, I was like, you know what, I'm going to figure out how to make my directorial debut, and I'm going to make it this film that I always wish existed.
So everyone watching this knows I'm a huge sci-fi guy, and that's partly obviously why, I love Ready Player One and I love dystopian futures and all of those things. And then I also love sci-fi movies that are based a little more in scientific reality, something like Contact, which really changed my life in a lot of ways, which was written by Carl Sagan, and Interstellar, which is phenomenal. And then obviously we're gonna get to Age of Disclosure in a second. But on the Ready Player One side of things, are we basically in the Oasis right now and we don't even know it? Is that what's happening here? In the movie, it's very obvious when they strap the helmet on. Are we just kind of there already? And are we doing like a Matrix version where we're the batteries now for the digital world? Have we crossed that threshold yet?
Well, look, I think Ready Player One, both the book and the movie, are a great look into the future and how it could be changed by social media and gaming and metaverse technology and all of these platforms that basically are a departure from reality, right? That give the average person an escape from reality and an alternative reality to live in. The movie depicts a future where most of humanity spends their time in the Oasis, this virtual world that is better than the real world, right? I do think that as time goes by, every year since Ready Player One came out, humanity is spending more of their day on these platforms that are not reality, right? Whether it's social media or gaming or other metaverse experiences, whether it's kids on Roblox or Fortnite, I do think that that's the trajectory we're heading on, to spend even more of our time in these alternative spaces. Me and Ernie Klein, the writer of Ready Player One, actually co-founded a company called Readyverse Studios, where we're building interoperable metaverse technology, the closest you can really get to the Oasis, right? Like interoperable metaverse games and experiences all on an interoperable platform called the Readyverse. And we're spending a lot of time and have invested a lot of resources into that. So we're trying to bring that technology as close as it can be to what's depicted in the Oasis, right?
How do you do that and make sure you don't become IOI?
Well, we just got to keep the right sort of moral compass, I think. Key to it is interoperability. Right now, when you go spend time in Roblox, you can't take your avatar or the things you buy out of Roblox. Same with Fortnite. What we're building is an interoperable tech stack platform where any game or experience can be interoperable. You could take your avatar from one thing to the other thing. You could take your same wallet from one thing to the other thing. That's the key. A real open metaverse experience. So we're actually working hard to bring those ideas to reality. But yeah, you're touching on a similarity in all these things I've been involved with, like Ready Player One and Age of Disclosure. I really like. First off, I like getting involved with films that are like challenged to pull off, where at the offset you're like, this is going to be really hard to pull off and make. That I love those kind of challenges. But I also like films that are both entertaining and commercially satisfying, but at the same time, can impact the future.
Yeah.
Like
well, that's why.
Inspires.
That's partly why I really like that Ready Player One, because it definitely had the popcorn elements, and then it also does actually make you think. So you referenced the Close Encounters in some of the early Spielberg movies. I think AI was a little later on, but he's always been interested in this kind of stuff. Were you always interested in aliens and what else is out there and all those mysteries? Is it just baked in? We're about the same age, East Coast guys. I don't know. Maybe it's just us. It's a Gen X thing. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, growing up, Close Encounters was hands down my favorite movie. E.T. was right behind it. And then, X-Files was on TV when we were kids. There was all this pop culture that made people our age curious about these ideas, right? Those big questions. Are we alone in the universe? Have we been visited by other intelligent life from elsewhere? Does the U.S. government actually know more about this? Are they really covering it up? These are the ideas that are like ingrained in the pop culture we grew up with, right? So, from that point on, from consuming those films and those shows, I've always read every book on the topic, watched every documentary on the topic. It's just become a lifelong interest, and I think that's the case for millions of people around the world.
All right, if you follow politics, everyone's got an opinion. Your group chats the pundits, and yes, even me. But on Polymarket, you get something better. Well, maybe not than me, but it's still pretty good. Real odds on what's actually likely to happen. Polymarket is a prediction market where people trade on real events, elections, debates, policy moves, and more. more. And it doesn't stop at politics. You'll find markets on the economy, tech, sports, pop culture, and even random internet moments that blow up for a week. It's live, transparent, and gives you a legit vibe check on what people really think. You've definitely heard about Polymarket before, so take a second and check it out. Head on over to polymarket.com right now. So the main driver, I would say, of the movie, but correct me if I'm wrong, is basically that humans are not alone in the universe. That's sort of first. And then the secondary piece is how governments have kind of hid this information and obfuscated what's going on. And that's kind of the balance of what you're doing there. How difficult is it to make a movie that is about something that is not supposed to be talked about?
Yeah, so I set off to make the most credible, serious, non-sensational documentary ever made on the topic. And I set the bar at only interviewing people who have direct knowledge of this topic as a result of their work for the U.S. government. And it's a hard, bar to set because, like you said, historically, people haven't talked up publicly about what they know, what they can legally share, right? And so the first thing I did is get introduced to a few intelligence officials who had actively worked this topic for the government and were now retired. And I formed relationships with these people over it must have been about a year. And really started to understand the lay of the land, started to learn what the reality of the situation is, did my homework.
And are they technically allowed to talk to you? I mean, what kind of contractual stuff do they have if they've been privy to this hypersensitive classified stuff?
Yeah, so here's just like a level set for the average person. People who work on this topic for the government, what they know falls into two categories. One, classified, and they just cannot talk about it with anyone, whether they're in private or in any scenario, right? The other information that they can lawfully talk about, historically, they've just been discouraged from talking about, right? Like, yes, you legally can talk about this, but if you do, your reputation will be ruined, your credibility will ruined. In some cases, people have been, given threats, threatening their lives. So there's been all these deterrences to people speaking about even what they lawfully could. And as I got to know these few intelligence officials early on, I learned that those were the circumstances, right? And the reason no one guy ever went out on, CNN or Fox or in a standalone article and shared his truth was because none of these guys wanted to be out on a limb on their own. They didn't want to be subject to ridicule by themselves. They didn't want to be the one guy saying something extraordinary and then have the people who covered this up go and attack them, right? It just wasn't worth it. And so as I learned that was the lay of the land, I presented an opportunity, a solution, which was, well, what if I make an independent film that I control? I don't set it up at a studio that's going to sensationalize it and make it all, entertainment. And I interview dozens of people who have direct knowledge of this. And we keep it all quiet. And you're arm in arm. There's strength in numbers. You're arm in arm with dozens of other credible people. There's no gotchas. Like I would socialize who's doing it, what's being discussed, what's being revealed. Everyone would know the full picture that's involved, and no one outside of the circle would know anything about it until it's done. And that opportunity I put forth started to catch wind, and then I started to get passed around within government, military intelligence circles, and I started to essentially, for lack of better words, get passed up the ladder. Next thing you know, it was like senior sitting senators and members of the House and White House National Security Council members and very senior intelligence officials saying, hey, I heard what you're doing and this is the only way it's actually going to come out, the way you're doing it. I want to participate, and all of a sudden my film became the vehicle that's never existed for these people to bring out the truth. So
it seems to me there's kind of two tracks here. There's one that there's intelligent life. So I'd like you to discuss what that actually means. And then there's sort of a technology component. And that seems to be more so where the government and the secrecy stuff seems to be more so around that. So when several of the people in the film talk about intelligent life, what are they actually talking about?
Yeah. So the two major headlines revealed in the film are A, there's been an 80-year cover-up of non-human intelligent life. So what that means is as far back as Roswell in the 40s, there have been crashes of UAP, formerly known as UFOs. And in some of those cases, the crashes had non-human bodies in them, intelligent life that is not human. And our country has a deeply hidden secret program that retrieves these technologies and bodies when they crash, right? and has secretly been trying to reverse engineer the technology for 80 years. So the film reveals that the existence of non-human intelligent life has been covered up for 80 years. Additionally, it reveals...
Now, do any of these guys offer you proof? I mean, I know there's several people telling you that. Was anyone able to offer you some sort of concrete proof beyond what they were saying?
So it's dozens of people saying it, actually, much more than a few. And the proof is them putting their name and reputation on the line. These days, I honestly believe that you could get a 4K video off a security camera on a military base of a giant UFO or a nuclear weapons site. And if you put it on your show, half your audience will think it was created by AI or by some Hollywood, visual effects studio. They'll be like, "Oh, you produced Ready Player One. You got some great visual effects."
Yeah.
That's the reality we live in. But credible people putting their name and reputation on the line, people who all hold security clearances and want to continue holding those security clearances, right? You can't hold a security clearance if you're crazy and on television making stating wild lies, right? It doesn't work out for you. So these people all put their reputation and their name on the line to share their truth, and I think that is the greatest evidence anyone could hope for in 2025. The only thing that I think would be more significant would be the president stepping to the microphone and saying, "Hey, definitively, we are not alone in the universe, and the U.S. has recovered craft of unknown origin, and we are in a high-stakes race with adversarial nations to crack this technology." That is the only thing that could be bigger than what is revealed in this film and the credibility of this film.
So trusting some of these people, and I understand if you have a plethora of these people who all are kind of in on it together, so that offers the protections. Did anyone show you anything that you were unable to put in the film or anything like that? Like, was there anything that you saw that was concrete outside of, yes, I agree, we could show it right now and half the people would say it's AI. But was there anything that you saw, video or heard audio, images, anything?
Well, I mean, no one I interviewed showed me any classified information, if that's what you're asking. They all are very well aware of classified information, and they say on camera in the film that the classified information they have seen would leave any person without a shadow of a doubt that this technology is non-human and that non-humans are controlling it. Look, I really think that this many credible people with a lot to lose, most of them have no relationship. These aren't people who are like all got together and made a plan of a story they're going to tell, right? These are people who are, all work in different areas of government or military or intelligence. They all have incredible resumes. They're all politically, they have different opinions politically. They have different worldviews and different ideologies, but they are all telling the same truth that they're aware of. It all lines up. And when like I interviewed Senator Gillibrand from New York, who was the Democratic nominee for president a few years back, or whatever, how many years back, on the same day in the same room that I interviewed Marco Rubio. These people have nothing in common. They're completely opposed politically and ideologically. And they both sat there for over an hour doing an interview with me and telling me how important this film was and how important it was to bring the truth out. So it's hard to unhear that, And when you know that all these people have real access to classified information, and they're sharing what they legally can because it's so important, you got to put stock in it. And if the stuff they're sharing is what they can lawfully disclose, the thing I constantly thought about is what's on the other side of that line. What's the stuff they can't disclose? If you're telling me that UAP activity over nuclear weapon sites is real, over a military basis is real, it's an ongoing issue, and we're in a high stakes race with China and Russia to understand this technology and reverse engineer it, and that situation's the atomic race on steroids, and you can share all that, what the hell's on the other side?
So on the alien front or the life form front, did anyone claim that any of these beings are still alive? So there's been these crashes, these ships, and I want to get to the technologies part that you just referenced, but are they claiming that any of these beings are still alive and being kept here, or they crashed and they were dead and then it was more about the technology?
Everyone I interviewed for the film that talked about bodies being recovered in these crash sites said that the non-human bodies were deceased that were found in these crash sites. However, after I finished the film, I did have a private meeting with one of the people in my film who told me that he was aware of a UAP crash site where a recovery team showed up and that one of the non-human beings was actually still alive but dying. And there was apparently some sort of, as wild as this is to hear, some sort of telepathic communication. And the message that this person on the recovery team heard in their mind was, you humans do not understand your full potential. And then apparently this being died. Now, I would say if 99.9% of the people I've met in my life told me that story, I would think, okay, sounds like a tall tale, sounds like bullshit. But the guy who told me this was an incredibly serious, credible person and pretty hard to unhear. Obviously, it's not in the film. It happened after the film, so it kind of doesn't matter to the public. But that was an interesting, moment for me.
If you've ever shopped online, chances are you've bought from a business that is powered by Shopify. And there's a reason so many businesses use it. Shopify doesn't just make it simple to buy, it makes it incredibly easy to start and run your own business. It's the commerce platform behind 10% of all e-commerce in the U.S., powering everything from household names to brand new startups. With Shopify, you can choose from hundreds of beautiful, ready-to-go templates to express your brand style. You can manage everything in one place, from inventory to payments to analytics, and even grow your audience with built-in marketing and email tools. So if you want to see fewer abandoned carts and more cha-chings, it's time to check out Shopify. Sign up for your $1 per month trial and start selling today at shopify.com/Rubin. That's shopify.com/Rubin. So most of the focus then is on the technology, which, as you said, now basically major governments and for about 80 years have been trying to reverse engineer this technology because it is the stuff that could basically rule the world in essence, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So the technology is so far advanced. It does things that our technology just simply can't do. Right. And there's been this secret, high stakes Cold War race to reverse engineer this technology for decades now. But now we're in a situation where it's very close between Russia, China, and us, most notably China and us. And that is a big concern to everyone who's aware of this topic. This technology can either be used to revolutionize our lives. It could, achieve things like solving the energy crisis. It could be the key to interstellar travel. It could lead to so many technological breakthroughs that just a few years ago seemed like science fiction, right? But could be real. They're like right in front of us, right? But this technology could also be used for evil. It could be weaponized. And as one intelligence official says, this race is the atomic weapon, the atomic race on steroids. You could weaponize this. You could put a nuclear weapon in one of these craft and, instantly have it anywhere in the world and, create strategic surprise that would change the course of human history. There's a lot of ways this could go wrong. The situation often reminds me and a number of the intelligence officials I've talked to about the space race. Kennedy gave that famous speech where he says, as we're entering the space race, he says, the U.S. is making it its national priority to win the space race because space technology, like nuclear technology before it, he says, has no conscience of its own. It can either be used for bad or evil. I mean, bad or good, and it's up to mankind, to determine that, right? And so his point in the space race speech was, it's imperative the U.S. lead in this race so that we can use this technology for the betterment of mankind and not to create another sea of war. And that's essentially the situation we're in right now. It's really imperative the U.S. lead here. So that we have this technology, we're ahead of the technology curve, and it's not an adversary like China, who we know has bad intentions towards the U.S.
How do you think the level of secrecy was maintained if this is a worldwide phenomenon? You sort of explained it from an American perspective. You could sit down with guys who could talk about certain things and they needed that kind of protection around everybody in some sense. But in that, Russia is involved and China is involved and probably other countries are involved. Every couple of years you get somebody on mainstream media that kind of says something like this and usually gets dismissed for the reasons you mentioned. How do you think the secrecy thing, is it just as simple as people are just afraid of their reputations, or is there some other industry around creating the secret?
Look, it's not what I think. It's what I've been told by my interview subjects, that the security around the deeply hidden program that has covered all this up is a significant, well-funded program. And so there are people whose full-time job it is to make sure this information doesn't get out. And there's a lot of people who have that job all over the world. And so you remember coming out of World War II, the U.S. had a lot of adversaries and a lot of allies, but they had more allies at that point, right? And so, systems got put in place where we share information. Our country shares information with allies and basically covers this situation up in any allied nation. And then adversaries don't have the same set of circumstances as us. Like there's no free will in Russia and China. The governments can clamp down on information a lot more easily. So I actually don't think it's as hard as it seems. Generally speaking, if you threaten people's lives, they stay quiet.
Did anyone have any insight into what these crafts that were coming here and crashing were they doing? Were they just probes that were looking for intelligent life and happened to show up here where we have it? Were they like, why hasn't there been an invasion? Why, if this was happening 80 years ago, have we not seen more in the last 10 years? Or maybe that's not the case. I don't know.
So one of the leading theories shared by a number of the people in my film with regard to intention of non-human intelligence is that the data shows there's a lot of UAP activity over our nuclear weapon sites and our military bases. That's where almost all of the activity is. And so that has informed a theory on intention, which is they are monitoring our technological progress. There's been an uptick in this UAP activity as we have advanced technologically, starting around the atomic race to now, as we go up this technology curve the last 80 years, where we're going from, cracking the atom to now we're creating black holes in labs, and we're getting to the point of understanding how to warp space and time. We're doing all this stuff that, 30 years ago would have sounded like something out of a comic book, right? But we're there. We're like technologically advancing at a rapid pace. And so the theory is that they're concerned with the fact that we are so quickly advancing technologically, but as people, we have not really evolved, morally. We're still threatening, to invade sovereign nations 80 years after World War II. We're still threatening to use nuclear weapons. We're a violent species. And so someone makes the analogy in my film, one of the intelligence officials, he says, hey, imagine the ants in your backyard. They're in your tree line. 3 generations of your family could live in your house, and no one cares at all about the ants in the tree line. They're there, doesn't matter. You're not a threat to them. They're not a threat to you. But what happens if circumstances change and you wake up one morning and all of a sudden the ants have figured out how to get under the door into your house, and they're in your living room? Now there's a new set of circumstances and you got to deal with it. And what would you do? Do you take the time to get the ants and scoop them all up and put them in the backyard again? Or do you just get rid of them? And there's a concern in the intelligence community that humanity is barreling towards this crossroad where we've evolved to a place where we are now presenting ourselves as a potential threat and problem for a more advanced species.
So my last question, and then we'll leave everything up for people to watch the film, is how long till you think the ants entered the house?
I think
our house. Enter the house where it will be undeniable that the ants are in the house. That's the question.
I think we're at the point now where it's undeniable. The people in Marco Rubio says on camera, on the record in my film, that UAP are penetrating our most classified airspace, including above our nuclear weapon sites. And he goes, that statement alone deserves urgent investigation, deserves to be taken seriously. It's happening. This is the situation we're in right now. So I think it's just about opening the public's eyes to it. And I think the public is having their eyes open. I'm proud to say the film immediately, within 48 hours, broke the record for the best-selling documentary ever on Prime Video. And it remains number 1 right now. And I think that's because the public is eager to learn the truth about this stuff. Our government hasn't been truthful with us. And thankfully, these 34 people bravely have stepped up and told us the truth. So I think change will come. And Dave, I think it's only a matter of time before a sitting president steps to the microphone and tells the world definitively, we're not alone in the universe, and has that Kennedy space race kind of speech where he says the U.S. is going to lead the way on this front in this new chapter. And I think that'll be the biggest moment in the history of the world.
Well, the link to Age of Disclosure is down below. And Dan, can I get some early access to your, what are you calling your oasis?
Oh, yeah, the Readyverse.
The Readyverse. I am a little hesitant and whatever, but can I get in there?
Yeah, we'll take care of you for sure.
All right, I'll see you on the other side.
Thanks, man. Great talking to you.
If you're tired of the mainstream media circus and want more honest conversations, go check out our media playlist. And if you want to watch full interviews on a wide variety of topics, watch our full episode playlist all right over here. And to get notified of all future videos, be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell.